Okay. Let me turn that on and you're good to go.
Yeah, well, nice to be with everyone again. As far as any news or update, I guess there's not a whole lot. Some of you are aware, all of you, we neighbor here, just very, very short distance from us, offered us this pasture for our cows. So we walked them down there, herded them down. That was very, very nice development. Give them a few acres of grass. Very nice. And I'm in the middle of writing a small book called Sakya Pranay. It's just going through the Prakat Leela of the Bhagavatam and selecting verses and commenting on them. The idea would be to create a book that you can have like maybe 25 or 50 verses that you can learn and cite, and then remember the commentary in the context of doing that. I come at the point now of the 15th chapter, started with chapter 11, the middle of chapter 11. And I did some later work, chapter 18 already, but chapter 15 of the 10th canto introduces the idea of Gopastami, but the Bhagavatam itself doesn't say anything about it. Neither do any other texts really in any detail. They mention it and so forth, other than some of the, Goswami's text. I think Jiva Goswami writes about it in Gopal Champu, which could be expected from him, but nobody else. So it's kind of something where you have to kind of build it behind your eyes and carry it in your heart, if you will, and know that it's enough to be on your way. But I'm short of Bhagavatam verses for it, so maybe I'll make some up. That's what I'm involved in. Anyway, at that, I've also been inspired by the Go Seva and so forth, and I promoted on Facebook our Go Seva program in Madhavan, asking for support. We have a link, patreon.com/GoService, and I want all of my disciples to participate in that. It's very easy to do. Cow service, yeah. Yeah, cow service. Patreon.com/cow service. Yeah, maybe you can put a link in the chat and on the YouTube. It's very easy to participate, and you can participate for as little as $1 a month. So I'd like everyone to go there and participate. And friends and disciples, the likes of whom are here on the call. So that's what I'm up to. And let's take the questions.
Oh, what about your health? There's something I would tell others, right?
Health is good. Gurnishta and Vrindaranya inspired me to take up the diet that they're also taking, which is we eat twice a day, like 8 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and then not again until 8 in the morning. So there's like 18, 19, 20 hours of fasting a day. Been doing it for about maybe 6 weeks or so, a month or 6 weeks. It's been very powerful, very, very, and we only eat whole foods, no processed foods. I have to preach a little bit to Prabhupada about it when I make my offerings in the morning. But it's a very, very good diet. It's been very, very good for my health. There are all kind of health solutions out there and whatnot. And this is one that I've experienced, at least, very powerful and very immediate effects. So hopefully I will extend my life through that and be with you that much longer. That's my hope. So let's take the questions.
Yeah. Okay, first one to go is Gayatri.
Okay, Hare Krishna. Hare Bol.
Hare. Yay.
So Good to see you too, Guru Maharaj. It's good to hear that you're doing better, that you feel well.
Yeah.
My question is, in a spiritual sense, what does it mean to ask the right questions? And what are those questions? And do they differ from person to person? And if so, how do I know what are the right questions for me to ask?
Well, that's an interesting question. But a couple things come to mind. First of all, Prabhupada used to say that he only asked his Guru Maharaj one question, and that was, how can I serve? Other than that, our mind should naturally go with regard to this question to the Bhagavad-gita. In the 4th chapter, Krishna explains pariprashnena sevaya, that one should ask questions, render service, or I suppose you could put the two together, pariprashnena seva, ask questions with a view to serve, which would be exactly what Prabhupada said, how can I serve? So I think that ideally, our inquiries, our curiosities, the curiosities of our head should be pursued with a view to acquire answers that we can then put into our heart, and as a result, they return into action and change in our life. So we want to build a foundation in our heart through our head. So I often say, use your head to soften your heart. So we refer to the knowledge within the school of Bhakti, which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was Sambandha Gyan, not just knowledge of the Atma and its difference from matter, which is the basic idea of knowledge in Vedanta, but the relationship between the self and matter, the self and Bhagavan, and so on and so forth. So inquiries to further our standing in understanding, what it is that we're involved in, the sambandha, the abhideya, the way itself, the path, prayojan, the goal, questions to further our understanding of such. We often refer to faith that is transcendental as opposed to mundane. Lokic faith would be like mundane faith, alokic, transcendental faith. The latter referring to faith that is a result of hearing, imbibing the understanding of the scriptural reasoning, logic, and evidence as to what bhakti is about, the nature of Krishna, and so on and so forth. So sometimes we refer to the Shastriya, Shraddha faith as Shastriya Shraddha, which means that we would inquire and ask for questions and expect that the answers would be supported by the scripture, and because we have faith in revelation, or we have a lack of faith in our own ability unto ourselves, with our mental, intellectual, physical capacity to know comprehensively, and thus act perfectly and be, as a result, completely happy, which is the goal of everyone. We have lack of faith in that. So if we emphasize that side, then we become more receptive to the idea that there may be another way of knowing, because we don't have it unto ourselves. And that's what we call revelation. So the idea of revelation is well reasoned in that, as I say, we reason to our own limited capacity, and that's just a testament to our own experience and to the history of human society. That with all its intellectual meanderings and so forth, it's not as a whole, and there are very few, if any, individuals that are really examples of being perfectly happy. But we have some in the school of the Transcendentalists and in Gaudiya, Vedanta, Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So good reason to accept, at least theoretically, the argument that there are real texts and insights, and that to know perfectly, one needs a perfect method. I often fold my hands to illustrate what's the perfect method. If he wants us to know about him, we can know, otherwise not. So, these are the general ideas around inquiring, asking questions from our teachers as to the texts, for example, what they mean, what the implications are, and so forth. This is probably the best idea of what kind of questions to ask, because the sum and substance of it all is a submissive inquiry, which the Gita recommends, qualifies the nature of pariprashna, questions. It should be submissive, which means that I accept that there's someone who knows, right? He knows. There's a very nice verse with regard to Abhideya Tattva. Abhideya means the way, the path. That means it was the very first verse that I ever learned. And I learned it in San Francisco at the Rath Yatra one year, very early, maybe 1972 or something like that. And I chanted it all the way home on the ride from, I was living in the Prabhupada's temple in Los Angeles, New Dwarka, he called it. So we would go up, to San Francisco for the Rath Yatra annually, chanted all the way down. And once Prabhupada also cited this verse in my presence and pointed to me, to other devotees who were present as an example. It's from the Gita. It's the second of, I believe, 4 what are sometimes called the essential verses of the Gita. And in all my inquiries and all of the knowledge that I've gathered over so many years about the path and how to proceed, it all really comes down to this one verse: Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhiyogam tam yenamam upayanti te. So I carry this verse in my heart, especially as I get older, more and more. It's become very simple. That's all one has to know. One knows this first and puts full faith in it. It says, Krishna says, those who worship me with love, tesham satata yuktanam, connected with me through love, bhajatam priti purvakam, dadami buddhiyogam tam, yenamam upayanti te. I, from within, direct them how to come to me. What I mean, it's very simple. It's extremely powerful, extremely profound. If I didn't know any other verse, this would be sufficient. If I had a confidence in it, which I do, which is my experience. So I guess relative to that, the inquiry should be sincere with a view to how to love Krishna, how to love him, how to serve him in quality and in any particular instance, and so forth. Obviously, devotees will have other questions that are in another kind of realm, so to speak, because we live in two realms as sadhakas. We live in the realm of sadhana, and we live in the material world, because the sadhaka deha, the body of a practitioner, it's sometimes described as a work in progress, right? So naturally, questions that pertain to our conditioning and the problems that arise in it, that arise in our minds, the difficulties, the obstacles, the ups and downs and so forth. It's pretty hard to get away from them. It takes time, and that's what we're practicing. So those just become music in the background. They're not really issues anymore. We should try to understand this point that our well-being has nothing to do with the outside. It has everything to do with the inside. We are so much taken up and down and concerned about our well-being with regard to the outside, what the political situation, what the social situation, what the weather is, what somebody else said to me, did to me, what my mind told me. All these things, our well-being depends not at all on the outside, only on the inside. Go within, as we say, or go without. But we live, as I say, as a work in progress, as sadhaka in both worlds. So there will be questions that come up, and there may be place to pose them, individual questions, and to our guru, to senior Vaishnavas and so forth, who have experience along the way and may have entertained or run into the same type of questions and so forth. But I mean, the further you go on that side, the more limited we are in terms of providing an answer. That our answer is a larger answer, a broader answer. As I've said before and written, that how to solve the, is it that the world has problems, or is it that the world is a problem? Well, it's really the latter, and the world is it's in our mind. That's where it is. The world's in our mind. We are what's the term? Idealists, right? It's ultimately God's mind, the whole world. It's not just in our mind, but our perception of it. It's all in our mind. So, we have to try to focus on the bigger question, the bigger picture. And the more we do, the more it solves the smaller questions. I've told a story before. It's kind of cute, I guess. When I was in sixth grade, which is pretty young, I had a crush on a girl, and whatever that meant, we weren't as we weren't sexually active or anything like that. I don't think they are. I think they are in sixth grade nowadays. I'm not sure, but anyway, when it didn't work out for whatever reason, whatever that meant, work out. Anyway, the course of events turned, and so I was very disappointed and weeping. And my mother asked me, what was the problem? And I tried to explain it. And then what she did was give me a bigger picture, right? And at that point, I realized getting the bigger picture is the solution to the smaller problems. So I have to step always into the bigger picture, and then how small they are, because my problem is so big to me, but it's not somebody else's. That's why if you share your problem with somebody else, it can shrink. If they're empathetic and they listen to you, give you an ear and so forth. There's a scriptural verse in this regard, I can't remember it now, that says the same thing. You share your problems with others, they'll become smaller. Or they won't become smaller, but they'll start to be perceived to be as small as they are. So I'm kind of meandering a little bit and rambling a bit about it. And at this point, with regard to relative questions, which, as I say, there's what can you say? If you ask me, Guru Maharaj, do you think I should marry this person? How well do I know the person who asked the question? how well do I know the person who he or she wants to marry? Probably even less. What kind of answer, let's be practical, can I give? Unless you think I'm some type of magical person who knows everything about everybody at all times, which isn't the case. For regard to knowing, I mean, that's a good part of it. Someone asked me a question, how well I know them will be a factor in how well I can answer the question. How well do I know all my disciples? Well, some more than others because I've known them longer. I've been around them. I've spoken with them. That's what it takes to know somebody practically. We can know their condition as a jiva, which is their real self and their prospect, and minister to that and assist them in bringing that out. But their other side, which we're talking about a little bit, the relative side and so forth, well, that's a whole other reality, right? So questions may come from that side, but the answers, we try to give answers from scripture, but I mean, obviously, what kind of answer can I give from scripture? If somebody says, I'm thinking of investing in, Bitcoin, I mean, what am I going to say? Well, the scripture says, maybe I should say, it says you shouldn't gamble. Is it gambling or is it invest? I guess you could get into something like that, but it's hard. So to give an absolute kind of answer. So you kind of limit the teacher or the one who you ask relative to how relative, if you will, your question is. On the absolute side, then inquiring about the nature of the path, the nature of the goal, and so forth. We should expect better, more comprehensive answers. Even in that realm, of course, there are different answers and different ways to look at certain issues and so forth. But again, to return to the beginning of the answer of my question, I refer to the Gita and to Prabhupada's kind of personification of it, pariprashnena sevaya, submissive inquiry and render service. And let's put the two together. Submissive inquiry means, how can I serve? That should be the motive, the driving motive. How can I, not just to contrast that with not just asking questions for intellectual, curiosity, that won't be helpful to me. There's not a lot of time, so we should be wise, use our time wisely and question for the sake of making progress. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you, Gurmash. I just have, I'm sorry I'm taking up too much of everyone's time, but when you say we should fold our hands and ask, how can I serve? Does that mean we should do that to everyone, or you, or senior devotees, or should we try to be submissive in everything in life all the time? And how would that be sustainable?
Well, it doesn't sound like it would be too sustainable from what you're saying. You're asking. I think it's true. I mean, we could try to serve everyone, but we should be intelligent and see it's not possible. People don't want it. You might have something good to offer, even if they don't want it. What can you do, right? So we should try to serve our guru, senior Vaishnavas. That would be wise. But we should try to serve those who are less informed, for example, about bhakti, by setting an example, answering their questions, right? So I think it's good to have a submissive serving attitude, but you should be intelligent also and understand there are situations where being submissive is not a solution. If a tiger attacks you, you don't become submissive. You at least try to get out of the way, So, okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Gurmash.
All right. The next question is from Prem Mantra from Brindabhumi. he says, how can we live and deal with the Uttama-Adhikari's healthy lack of discrimination? They see that everything is Krishna's arrangement, all is good and fine. We do not see like that at all. So how to harmonize that without falling into intimidation or some kind of improper discrimination of the Uttama-Adhikari?
Well, I think that the Uttama-Adhikari perspective, as you're asking about it in the question, is largely a departure from external consciousness. We find Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who could be a better example of an Uttama-Adhikari, but most of the time in Adi Lila, Madhya Lila, he would depart, if you will, from external consciousness and go into a trance and so forth, and conduct himself in a particular way. It was obvious that he was not living in the world of the senses and of the mind to those who were, in terms of being an external consciousness. And it's fairly obvious that they can't just enter into that or imitate that themselves, that's a state of consciousness. When you get into the Madhya Lila, then eventually he completely goes internal. So he could not function in relation to the external world. So therefore, for the most part, even an Uttama-Adhikari will function as a Madhyama-Adhikari in external consciousness, discriminating appropriately. Of course, his discrimination is coming, not that he doesn't have more realization from a Madhyama-Adhikari, he does, but my point is that to function in the world, you kind of have to function as a Madhyama-Adhikari and discriminate. So if an Uttama-Adhikari lacks discrimination and it's not a way to run your life, so to speak, or your mission, if you have one. There's all kind of practical concerns there where discrimination, exercise of the intellect, making judgments and so forth is essential. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that said, okay, let's say you're living with an Uttama-Adhikari in a mission, and he or she has a certain perspective that's put out that is impractical for the reality of everybody there, then those that are close to such a devotee, him or her, they might have to give it some advice. And present the practical reality of everyone, that and the condition of the mission and the circumstances and how that might become impossible, if you will, that kind of vision to function. I think that seems to be what your question's about, because I know where you're from. Also, I know a little bit about the situation there. So I think that that's how to look at it. We can't imitate the lack of discrimination on the part of the Uttama-Adhikari. But if we try to enter into the perspective of a Madhyama-Adhikari, then and with regard to the Uttama-Bhagavata, we'll go there to some extent. We go there to some extent. That's a realization, a perspective that we want to gravitate towards, but it's not something that we can imitate, or that you could live in, as I'm saying, in any practical way. I mean, if we take the stories of someone like Gorkashore Das Babaji, I mean, nobody can live like that unless they're just altered entirely, and then you have to take that person with a grain of salt, practically speaking, right? With all faith and all regard, you know, in another sense. Hope that helps.
Thank you. And then there's a long question from Abhay. I'm going to go slow for Sham Sundar's sake. Abhay says, Haribol Guru Maharaj, I wonder if you could speak on a subject for us. In one biography of Bhaktivinoda, it describes a term he uses called sahaja samadhi. Normally, sahaja is used with a negative connotation, but in this example, it was used to describe something very positive. It goes on to describe sahaja samadhi as a state of spiritual knowing coming completely from the heart of a surrendered devotee, wherein a devotee is able to understand spiritual truths that are beyond the reach of logic alone. He mentions there are also two stages. At one point, the devotee's sahaja samadhi will be mixed or filtered through his mental facility, and in the latter stage, it will be completely in the heart as unfiltered spiritual understanding and vision. I wonder if you can expand on this for us so that we can better understand and strive for this in our spiritual lives. Also, to help us further move into our hearts as the seat of our soul rather than our minds. And that was the question.
Well, first of all, the term sahaja, sahaj means natural. I think it means easy. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur took it in the context in which he often uses it as cheap. And that with regard to the idea that that the high goal of Radha Dasyam, of Krishna praying, and so forth, were that the founding charges were absorbed in, is something that we can sit down and enter into, you know, in a short period of time. Once some of his disciples approached him and said they had a doubt, and the doubt was that they had been for 10 years practicing, but the high things that he talked about were not coming within them. And he said, "Oh, I'm relieved to hear your question. If you had said that for 10 years all these high things were coming in you, I would have had doubts about you, but you were misunderstanding. It's not that easy." And so he used the term in that way, cheap, or imitating Haridas Thakur, for example. And he advocated, like the Bhagavad-gita, get up, do something, kind of a nishkam karma within the context of bhakti, right? Stay active, do something, preach, and so forth. And then that, as we see in the example of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, will draw one naturally to, if your external life is conducted properly, will naturally, as it was in his case, draw one naturally to an internal life, right? So that's how he used the term sahaja. Bhaktivinoda Thakura. You can give another example in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Ramananda Roy described it as a Sahaj Vaishnav. We take that to mean that he's a natural Vaishnava. The Vaishnavism was natural for him. He wasn't particularly, well, I shouldn't say that. He was an author. But anyway, a natural Vaishnava. So that's another definition or interpretation of the word sahaja. So Bhaktivinoda Thakura, Sahaj Samadhi, is using the term in more, obviously in the latter sense. And what he's really speaking about there is spiritual intuition, like I mentioned in the verse of the Gita that I learned first. Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, Krishna from within, give inspiration, guidance, light, and so forth. That will answer all questions. All questions will be answered by those types, or all doubts will be erased more by internal experience than by argumentation, reasoning, scriptural reasoning, and so on. So it all has its limitations. He's saying there, he's elaborating on the idea that our goal, the ideal that we speak about, is beyond the capacity of words to describe it, to capture it, or thoughts to capture it. And so he's advocating an emphasis, you're emphasizing the trans-rational practices, and how they can afford us a knowing that exceeds that we can gather even from our scriptural study, which is Gyan Yagya, according to the Gita, 1870. And it's easy to be engaged in studying the scripture and be involved inadvertently in a kind of an intellectual sleight of hand, where you think because your intellect has grown with information, you've actually become more spiritually advanced, and you could speak about the tradition in such a way other people will become attracted and so forth, which serves to potentially to foster that sleight of hand. And so, that's why it's important to emphasize that we should study the scripture with the head to soften our heart. It's tricky. And so, and I don't want to minimize the importance of studying the scripture and so forth, but as far as knowing goes, or let's say retiring doubt, experience retires doubt more than any kind of intellectual knowing. You may know all the arguments of scripture upside down, inside out, and backward. There are counter arguments to everything. Tarko pratishthanat, sutras say. There's always another angle, always another way of thinking about it. So we should gather our spiritual Gaudiya logic and so forth that will help to support us, but it should help to support us by way of inspiring us to practice and take up these simple practices of hearing and chanting, for example, that are transrational and can afford us the samadhi, and intuition, and the kind of knowing that you can't even put into words, like Bhaktivinoda is trying to put it into words. So those kind of internal epiphanies and so forth, that's what we are seeking through our practice. That's what's most confirming. That's the ultimate pramana, evidence. We say scripture is the praman that exceeds its capacity to afford us knowing the senses and mind and intellect, because it speaks about things that are beyond mind and intellect, but still it speaks about them with intellectual arguments and so on and so forth. You know, it's limited what can be said. You can't entirely capture it. Therefore, we have to keep talking about it. Can't say enough about it. But enough to inspire us to really embrace the simplicity and of the practices wholeheartedly, whereby we can arrive at these kind of internal, natural epiphanies, and that your natural self will come out, something like that. That's basically what he's talking about there. I hope that helps.
Thank you. And the last question is from Madunam from Chile. He says, modern science discovered that when a spermatozoon unites with an ovum, the nuclei of both fuse, forming a new human being with its own DNA, different from that of its parents, thus beginning its natural development. My question is to understand at what
Radha Krishna Pranay Vikritirladini Shaktirasman Ekatma Vapivu Purideham Vedogato Chaitanya Kyam Pakatam Tadvayam Chaikyamaptam Radha Bhava Duty Svalitam Nami Krishna Swarupam.
So Mahaprabhu is the new development, right?
Yeah, the two become one. It's a new thing. Prema Vivarta Vilas. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so, yeah. So then he says, my question is to understand at what point does its entrance, basically he's asking at what point does the jiva enter into a certain body? Because some organizations that approve abortion say that the fetus is only a combination of cells. Thank you very much for your clarification.
Well, I think that there's a very kind of basic discussion of that in the Bhagavatam. Maybe it's the third canto or the fourth canto. I don't recall that it gives a precise, timeline at this point rather than that point. And so I don't think we can weigh in, if you will, with such detail on the abortion argument from scripture. We do so more in a broad way, which I believe is a perspective that everyone accepts, that it's an undesirable thing, that it's not a good thing. It may have a relative goodness in certain circumstances that are rare, but largely it's a very unfortunate thing. I mean, I think that the demigods wanted to kill the child within the womb of Hiranyakasipu's wife. So they were advocating abortion at the time because they thought, well, a big demon's going to come out of as a result of being the son of Hiranyakasipu. So there may be some place for that, but it's unfortunate, and everybody seems to accept that. Now, but what they gravitate to from there is this practical side, the practical side. So the lesser of two evils. When you got one evil, because there are circumstances where there is a lesser evil, and then there's room to think about things like that with regard to that issue. But our solution to it would be thought of as very impractical in today's world. Sexuality is very much promoted, to say the least, and it's a natural tendency. It's very much what people, materially speaking, are about, biologically speaking, psychologically speaking. So if you inflame it, then the scriptures don't inflame it. They go the opposite way. Opposite way. They try to put out the flame. They try to harness it, and so on and so forth. So if you take that off and you just let it go, despite the fact that everyone believes, as I've often said, it needs to be harnessed on some level, everybody agrees with that. We have a certain worldview, and so where we make our restriction, where we advocate the restriction or the harnessing of that urge, and so if it will be different than those who have a different worldview. If your worldview is not transcendent, if this life is not in pursuance of something else, if there's not something more, then yeah, it's among all the sensual experiences, it's has a pretty high on the charts, right? And so when you have a society like that, then to offer as a solution to the problem the kind of celibacy, for example, or even within marriage only, or a sanctified relationship and so forth. It's not going to work for people. You're really going upstream. Given that, people come up with their arguments as to when, if not when, and so on and so forth. But anyway, aside from that, I don't think there's an answer in the scripture as to the exact. You could say, well, actually, according to the scripture, it comes in the third trimester, and therefore before that, it's just cells, and therefore you can abort it. And that kind of answer is not given. Now you can look in the third canto, but I believe, if anything, the argument from scripture would be at the time of conception itself. So someone may say that it's only cells, there's no life there. I would imagine that they're looking at it in terms of biological life and how it expresses itself and makes itself known. And there may be an argument from that point of view that there's no life there, but of course the Atma is something that transcends biology and is life in a deeper sense than biological life. And our perspective is, the more I think about it as I talk, is really that what makes the whole thing go round, what makes the cells move, what makes matter move is consciousness. So consciousness is the life. And so if you have life forming, it makes sense that consciousness is forming it. We say that the body, actually we say, the Bhagavad-gita says that the body that you will be born in is formed in the previous body. In the consciousness, yam yam vyapi sparam bhavam tyajite ante kalevaram tam tam evaiti kuntaya sadatad bhava bhavita. 8th chapter of the Gita. So that body, that collection of cells, is formed by the jiva himself in a previous life, relative to his preoccupation. Now the preoccupation is the subtle body, the mind, and so forth. Well, matter comes out of mind, right? Gross matter comes out of subtle matter. So the gross body in the next life is coming out of the subtle matter of the mind. But behind that, driving that mental conception and the physical developments subsequent to it is consciousness. So consciousness driving the whole thing. So it's kind of an argument for, at the point of conception, I would say. Hope it helps.
Okay, there is actually one more question from Krishna Kanaya. She says, Haribol, Srimad Bhagavatam contains, what was that? Kurmash, did you say something?
No, she said Haribol. I said Hari.
She says, Srimad Bhagavatam contains 10 subjects as described in the verse 2, 10, 11. But where does it say about the 5 topics of the Gita? Did Srila Prabhupada say it?
5 topics of the Gita, I think you're talking about Baladev Vidyabhushan's edition of the Gita, where he speaks about them. Prabhupada dedicated his translation and purport of the Gita to Baladev Vidyabhushan also. Baladev Vidyabhushan is the second amongst the earlier Gaudiya Acharyas who wrote a full commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. The first, as far as I know, was Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura, although Advaita Acharya was said to regularly recite the Gita and explain it. And it was also said Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wrote out the Bhagavad Gita in his own handwriting, all the verses. And that's, I think he gave it to Gauridas Pandit. And that's still available. He didn't write a commentary on it. We don't have a commentary from Advaita Acharya, so we're just going back. But Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura wrote a famous commentary, and Baladev Vidyabhushan, who was a follower of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura, wrote a commentary subsequently. And Prabhupada says he dedicated his Gita to him. And those 5 topics, what are they? Karma. I can't even remember them all.
Hare Krishna.
Tell me them.
So it's karma.
Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Hare Krishna. It's karma, prakriti, Ishvara,
Nature.
Kala,
Ishvara.
and the jiva.
Ishvara.
Ishvara, and then Kala, time,
and jiva.
and the jiva.
Yeah. So that's his perspective. It's very useful. He's drawn that out, and I don't think anyone else has before him has said that, but afterwards, following him, we appreciate that. Okay.
Thank
Good.
you.
Short question. Nice to see you.
See you in Poland.
Yes, I'll be there in about a month. A little bit more than a month. Looking forward to it. So we have about 4 or 5 minutes. Any other comments?
Vamsidari wrote something in the comments about the abortion issue that kind of gives an interesting look on the kind of like the, you could say, more secular way of looking at the matter. And I'd be interested to see how you answer this. He says, when he's talking about the fetus, he says, tumors are also alive. They have their own genetic makeup and blood supply and life in them that wants to live, but we don't consider them beings.
Tumors. Well, I guess, relative to how I was speaking earlier, you're speaking about biological life. Biologically, a tumor's alive, but not. But I guess what you're saying, but we don't consider that there's a jiva present there. Yeah, I guess that's true. And we remove a tumor without thinking of it in the same way as removing a fetus, because the tumor doesn't have the potential, given that arrangement of the cells and so forth, it doesn't have the potential to become a human being, whereas the fetus does. So the fetus is a particular biological arrangement that the jiva inhabits, whereas the tumor is not. So what's the question? How can, if the tumor is biologically alive, but there's no jiva, couldn't we say that the fetus, I guess is the argument, is biologically alive at a certain point, but there's no jiva present, and only when the jiva becomes present does it have the potential to become human. Therefore, argument being, why couldn't we treat the fetus in an earlier stage just as a tumor, right? If you understood what you say, that's kind of the argument.
Seems like it, yeah.
Yeah. Because I guess our perspective is that that the jiva enters at the conception. Now you can argue that we're wrong, and again, I'm not sure that there's a precise statement to that effect in the scripture, but it seems to be the overriding perspective. I had to look and see in the Bhagavatam what it says there. And that biology can arrange, that a tumor can be biologically alive and not have consciousness in it. I don't know. It doesn't mean that that there's something going on without consciousness behind it. I mean, I'd have to study tumors, I guess, a little bit more, but that's how I would think about it. It's obviously a very complex subject, and in most countries, like in this country, there's a whole political perspective, the autonomy of the body for the individual over the state is basically the argument, as I understand it, that should the state have autonomy, or should the state have control of the body, or should the individual owner of the body, inhabitor of the body, be autonomous, whereby then something could be morally wrong, but it's not a law. It seems to be the argument. So people will do, and anyway, it's complicated, as I say. I don't have all the answers to that. I'd have to, you have to look pragmatically, I suppose, at the issue and see, well, if there is abortion allowed, then are there actually less abortions than if an abortion is not allowed? You might have more abortions if it's not allowed, and other problems that result from that, death of the mothers and other problems and so forth. I think that's what gave rise to abortion laws in the first place. So I have an open mind about it. I have a world view about it that I think everyone agrees with. It's not a good thing, but it may be relatively good in certain circumstances. Maybe lesser of two evils in a world that is full of such evils and contradictions that are impossible to resolve, in the world itself. I mean, it just speaks about the nature of the complexity, that life does not conform to reason. It's bigger than reason. It's just bigger than reason. So you can reason about it one way, you can reason about it the other way, ad infinitum. Therefore, I have to, withdraw my perspective, sattvic perspective, people, transcendental perspective. That's it's not that the world has problems, it's that the world is a problem. That may sound to those who are more identified with the world as a cop-out, so to speak, but you have to back it up with your example. And if you can live on that, in that perspective, that the world is a problem itself and you're doing something about it, and your own example illustrates that, and how by that you can solve all the problems, you can solve your economic problem, then it speaks somewhat, but it's just, who's going to do it? A few people. We're all doing it, all of us here. Gradually, it takes time. But to become a sadhu, and to become a mukta. Manushanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye yatatam api siddhanam kaschin ma viti tapata. It's 1 in a million. You will be, all of you, one in a million, infinite jivas. But when? What is your time? And so forth. So, selling a transcendental worldview as a solution to all the problems of the world is a hard sell. I mean, we do it. We try to sell it, but it's a pretty hard sell. It's never going to get, all the traction that you would like. Therefore, Bhaktivinoda Thakura said, in the end, what could I do? I tried to preach, but it didn't work. He tried to change the whole world, right? Yeah. Bhaktisiddhanta also formed a big institution, 64 mosques, and in the end, he said, anyway, these institutions got their problems. What can you do? So we're optimistic and so forth, but we see that a comprehensive solution to the problems is not one that those absorbed in the problems and worldly perspective are going to be able to relate to entirely. To some extent, yes, and take it up gradually, and therefore you have this whole system in the Hindus, which is really something that should be pointed to, the whole system. And that's really what Bhaktivinoda tried to do with his advocacy of Varnashram. He said, look at the whole thing here, look at the whole, organize our life in this way, that we move, you want praying bhakti, but it's over here. Move through it, understand a Varnashram perspective, to have balance psychologically in your life and so forth. And prescribed duties relative to your physio-psychological makeup, and pursue that as a matter of, it should be done without attachment to the results, and then knowledge comes, and all these things. So, and within bhakti, he wanted to have kind of promote the same. There's kind of soul gradation, but anyway, it's a hard sell. We got a few customers here. Good. Sridhar said, "What can I do?" People would say, "Why don't you go feed the hungry?" He said, there may be only a few people, but they're hungry for this, and I'm feeding them. If I go to feed the people who are hungry in the stomach, well, what about the people who have some little hunger for this? A little hunger for a comprehensive solution to the problem. Should that not be treated? So yeah, small circle, but he felt confident that his time was spent wisely. And I have the same feeling with regard to our Sangha. Or Premanande, Haribol. Okay, nice to talk with you.
You too very much. Thank you for the class.
Don't forget the cow saver now. There's a link.
Patreon.com/cow service. Haribol.
Okay.
And the next class is going to be by Sham Sundar. It's the 24 gurus, and it's water this time next Thursday. So tune in if you want to hear a good class.